This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Hi, welcome to the Heroic Voice. I am here with Mary Bellamy, comic book artist, colorist, animation person, multi-talented. Mary, for those of people who don't know who you are, why don't we take a few minutes to talk about your past, your history, how you got into doing what it is you do?
Hi. Well, like you said, I have done many different fields in the whole art industry. I got my start in small indie comics as an anthology creator, a writer, and an artist, and eventually I started doing my own stuff. But I started with Shanded Fantasy Arts. I did some inking for their stories. I did some short entries for their little anthologies like Women in Fur and New Horizons. I moved over to Radio Comics, did stuff for Furlough, Manga File, and a bunch of their pinup books. Moved over to Antarctic Press, did some work on their original fan stuff, and then worked on Mangazine later. I got pulled into sketch cards with Marvel, DC, and Adventure Time, and a bunch of licensed stuff. Then eventually I got pulled into My Little Pony, which is my most well-known work that I've done. I've done comic book covers for IDW, and I'm currently working with Renegade Game Studios as an illustrator, designer, and cover artist.
Renegade Games. I'm not familiar. What do they do?
They do tabletop games, RPGs. Right now they're doing I think it was like Power Rangers and a bunch of other stuff, but I'm on the My Little Pony section.
Mm-hmm. They've stereotyped you.
I love My Little Pony. I've like over 250 of the original dolls. Like if you look behind me, I have a whole collection of dolls. So it doesn't bother me. I love all things girly.
Okay. So let's talk about a little bit more about what you're doing now. Um, you know, what I mean, you love My Little Pony. You've said as much.
Yes.
What?
Well, I also do my own books. So
Yes, let's talk about those. Absolutely.
I write, draw ink, and do my own graphic novel series, and I sell at San Diego Comic-Con every year. So All Heck is about a girl who winds up in the underworld trying to escape from evil bunnies and killer teddy bears because God turned the underworld into a farm program. Only Angel never got the memo. So it's like full color. This story is contained. It says about her origin and what happened to her. And then there's a sequel that says, well, what happened to all the other girls? How did they get into the program? Did they ever get out of the program? And then my other series is more of an all ages book for kids. It's Bofax. It's about a group of friends where crazy things happen to them, junk food nightmares, cartoon characters come to life, killer starfish. Basically, a former friend unleashes a chaos entity on their town. And of course, they're the only ones that can stop it. So that one is like 10 volumes already. I'm working on volume 11. Maybe I'll have it by Comic-Con. I'm not sure because we don't know right now with all the tariffs and all that. But I'm hoping to.
How long have you been working on that? Doing 10 volumes?
So Fofax actually started out in the Radio Comics anthology Manga File. So I started doing short stories for that in like the early 2000s. Eventually, someone encouraged me and gave me a spot at their table at Comic-Con to sell the first compilation of the stories. And if you know anything about animation, when shows get greenlit, the first season is usually episodic stories that get you interested in the characters, and then the later seasons will give like more lore and it gets a building narrative to like a more complex story. So the first faux facts is just a bunch of shorts, but then I decided, you know what, I want to take it more of a cohesive story, and then I did the same thing. So I've been working on that since like 2008 to today. It's been a huge part of my life.
Yeah. I've seen your artwork. I love your artwork.
Well, thank you.
It's how do I describe it? It's not actually anime like, but it's how would you describe it?
80s meets indie meets anime meets girls cartoons.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty nice. You have, I assume, social media. Where would people be able to follow what you're doing, or just communicate with you?
Oh, I'm everywhere under the username Zorilita, Zorilita. And like I'm on YouTube, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, uh, DeviantArt under Mary Bellamy. Usually, if you find Zorilita Mary Bellamy, that's me.
Okay, all right. Um, Animation. You've been involved in that. Tell us how you actually got started into the animation industry. Some history here.
Okay, so usually when you try to get into comics or any kind of entertainment, you go to conventions, you talk to editors at comic book companies, and you talk to like producers and stuff. So my first animation job was the Drew Carey green screen show with Acme Filmworks, and I got that through the school that I went to. It was just like a smaller kind of, I don't know if you would call it a PA job. Long before they had digital tablets, this particular show, they would animate over live action. So they would print out like thousands of frames, and we'd have to secure them to animation paper and do the registration. So Peg and Reg Crew was my first animation job. Later, a friend I was talking to, he worked at Titmouse, and he's like, "Hey, we need people for this one project, you know." And it was like my first like trial by fire kind of job. It's like, "Here, clean up this animation. You've never done it before, and there's a crazy deadline, but go you." So yeah, that was like my first thing. Eventually, people came to me and they're like, "Hey, we're developing a pitch for a TV show. Can you do the character designs? Can we help me do a sizzle reel?" Unfortunately, those shows didn't go anywhere, and that is very common that you'll work on something, get paid for something, and then it gets stuck on a shelf somewhere and it never sees the light of day. Um, Mostly, those jobs like are all NDA, so I can't really talk about it. But then I went back into more comics and illustration work after that.
So it was a brief stint in animation.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're not doing any of that currently, then I gather. It's just
Well, actually, I'm working on my own project. So
ah,
with Fofax, I'm doing animated storyboards, and I did a sizzle reel with Ahek, and I'm working on that. And I've done some storyboards and animatics of another story I did called Sweet Justice, which was renamed from Cosmic Cupcake with a magazine. It's completely different. It's nothing like the comic book story, but I've already got a pilot storyboarded and an animatic made. So there's the voices and all this the stuff that makes it work. So I'm hoping to either work on that or maybe get that funded at some point. At this point, animation is kind of on fire right now. The industry is up in arms with AI and the fires and the union strikes, and everything's just really chaos. And so it's like, you know what, let's just work on our own stuff. And so maybe if it corrects itself, we can go that way, or we can just be indie creators.
yeah, it's a tough time across a lot of different industries right now, not just animation. Um, what about future projects? You've already alluded to that. You've got those animation projects that you're working on. Is there anything else on the drawing board?
I've actually been writing novels. I've been
Oh,
novelizing some of my series and going into stories that I couldn't do with the comics, because when you're doing comics alone, I'm like, I'm writing, I'm drawing, I'm inking, I'm coloring, I'm doing. it's a lot. And so writing a novel is a completely different kind of animal, but it helps you get your ideas out there faster. Cause it's like when I write my graphic novels, it's like I have the ideas, those are done pretty fast, but it's like drawing it that takes the time. So I'm wanting to go off into a novel field right now, just branching out and doing all sorts of new things just to get your voice out there.
Different genres require different treatments.
Yes.
I know. We were working with a publisher a while ago who did some prose adaptations of Blair and Liberty Girl. Um, Only did a few of those, and then he seems to have closed up shop. So I'm hoping we can find somebody else to work with in that regard because I'd love to take our characters across all different media. I'd love to take our characters into animation. You any interested in maybe working with us on something?
Well, we can see. I mean,
Okay.
right now, I think the interesting thing is the way when I first got into animation and all that is that everything had to be a property, an IP. It wasn't just, oh, this is just a comic. It was, but it could be a cartoon, but it could be a movie, but it could be this. And it was like, that's how it was all pitched. That's how I came up with faux facts of like, here's doll creations, here's the comic, here's a story treatment for a TV show. And I pitched at Disney and Warner, Disney and Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. And at that point, they weren't quite ready for the female leads, but you know what? It's okay. I'm glad to have creative control of my stuff.
All righty. Is there something that you'd like to talk about in regard to the way the comic book industry currently works? Do you see problems with it, or do you think everything's hunky dory? Or what would you change if you could change anything about the way, you know, comic book companies operate?
Well, I mean, for me, this is just like personal opinions, but I think right now we're kind of in a very precarious place with Diamond is like dangling on the precipice of can they pay their people? Are they going to go bankrupt? That's
They're in bankruptcy, as far as I know. It's a
yeah,
Chapter 11, I believe.
yeah. I mean, totally gone or partly gone. But when I first started, there were like 8 different distributors for comics.
Mhm.
Like there was multiple ways, and then like Radio Comics that I worked for, Shanda Fantasy that I worked for, they ended up not being able to keep going because Diamond put ridiculous restrictions on them, and they wouldn't carry their books anymore.
Yes.
I think that kind of system is not the best system because it cuts off the smaller press people. People who've done Kickstarters are kind of hit and miss as to whether they could get into Diamond or not. Um, there's issues with like right now everyone's scared about tariffs, about the cost of paper and printing, whether printing overseas or printing here, because when I first started printing here, oh, it was crazy expensive. I had like $9 a unit for a book for kids that was like for 50 pages, and people are like, I don't want to pay that, and I understand, but it's like at some point it's like trying to balance the feasibility of printing costs and the way that the system's kind of structured, like, oh, you got to buy a floppy book and then you got to buy the trade and then you got to buy the omnibus. And I think with like when you're looking at manga, you can just walk in and buy a volume. You know, you got a 150-page book right there. And while some of them go ridiculously long, it's just easier to get the whole a larger portion of the story than with like American look. It's like, okay, here's 22 pages, here's another 22 pages. Now you got to go buy all 5 of those in another book. And I'm like, can I just skip to the part where I buy the book that I can put on the shelf? I think a lot of the issues with that are kind of challenging for people who want to collect it. And you're like, I have limited income, I can't keep
Yeah.
repaying. And I think there should be more support for like Kickstarters and indie crowded stuff. And people who are smaller should be able to have some of the marketplace. Like when I first started, certain publishers told me that, oh, we don't do comic books. Comic books are for kids. That's not real books. Then all of a sudden, oh well, graphic novels are cool. We want them, but those are kind of for boys. And then I was like, okay, well, boys are cool, but now you got that anime influence in your art, and it's oh well, that's cool now, but you're not what we're looking for. And you're kind of like,
Everything changes. Everything changes.
yeah, yeah. It's like there's no hard set rule. And the other thing about comics is even when you're in, you're not in. Like the
Yeah.
next day, it's like, okay, there's something new going on. So you're like, okay, and then it's just trying to find your foothold and stay relevant is just like it's not just a business thing, but it's like an indicative thing of our time as to what people can handle and what they can't. So I think it's harder to tell certain kinds of stories when you're just focusing on getting the bottom dollar.
So let me pose a question to you. You mentioned the collections. Are you planning to do a collection of the
Oh yeah, I actually already did Heck's first the first print run was like 3 volumes.
mhm.
So at that point, print on demand could not handle file sizes over like 50 megs, which was ridiculous. Now you can do it. So like I have a complete version of that.
Let's see
Uh,
it.
I'm working on so this is the full one.
Ah,
The other one was 3 smaller ones like this small.
mhm.
So I combine them together. I'm hoping to do that with faux facts, but what I really want to do is a real print run because print on demand is hard because the quality issues. Like whoever, like say you have Amazon Kindle or whatever, whoever they might ship it off to might do a great job, and you're like, oh, that's great. I'll order 20 copies and they'll be fine. And you're like, okay, well, I need to order another 50 copies, and they'll ship it off to another company, and it
And
looks
it
like garbage.
looks, yeah,
And you're like, no, no, I'm not paying for that. You're gonna do it over again.
yeah. I find it better to find somebody you can rely on
Yeah.
and work with them. We work with Kablam for the most part. We've actually started doing some anthology collections. We've got a Flare archive, another couple of them coming on the way, a Captain Thunder archive, and we're working with Critical Blast on those. And I'm very happy with those books. Oh, actually, I've got one here. Let me show you.
Yeah.
Here we are. More on the way, but this is
Oh
the
wow.
Flare archive. Oh, it's backwards. We'll have to.
I see it
We can
though.
fix that. You can see it, okay?
Yeah.
This collects the first 10 issues of Flare, which were all like 52-page books.
Yeah.
And then because Roy Thomas was having some issues with Marvel that have been resolved amicably about the Captain Thunder name or the Blue Bolt
Uh,
name here,
yeah.
right? We produced this volume for Roy that collects all of the published Captain Thunder adventures. And I'm very happy with the quality that Critical Blast was able to get with those books. So you might want to think about
Yeah. Because
talking with Kablam and with Critical Blast. It could be worth your while.
and one thing I would mention is a lot of new people don't realize this. It's worth it to go to get your own ISBN numbers rather than
Absolutely. Yeah.
ordering on Amazon. I made that mistake because I didn't really realize it. So go mass buy, like get the pack that's like 200
Mhm.
at one time, and then that way you have it and you don't have to keep buying them over and over again, and you'll be able to get distributed better to libraries and stuff because a lot of libraries will not take your stuff if you're not distributed through Bowker and
Bowker books on books
yeah,
in print, books in print. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. That's one thing I find is disappointing with a lot of library systems. It's like, oh, we can't buy it because it's on Amazon. I'm like, my books are in Escondido Library. They couldn't keep them on the shelves because kids kept checking them out. Because there's not a lot of female centric stuff that doesn't focus on like, oh, I'm a princess or oh, let's get a boyfriend, and those are fine. But when you're in that other section of the market, you're like, what's left for me? what can I read that isn't about romance and stuff like that?
yeah. Okay. Um, I was going to say, right, back when we first started doing book format stuff, I knew about that. We grabbed 100 of them, and we still haven't run out after all these years. So we just haven't produced that many in book format. But you need to gauge how many books you're going to be doing 100, 200, or 1,000.
Yeah,
You can get them in chunks. And
yeah.
if you're going to be doing book publishing, you got to have those. You really do. So that's good advice. What other advice would you maybe give to an aspiring creator, whether it's in
I think it depends on what you're aiming for. Like the one thing I would recommend is finding a way to be part of a smaller anthology. Like challenge yourself to be able to tell a story in like 8 to 10 pages.
Mhm.
Like a lot of the time people are like, I'm going to do my magnum opus and it'll be 5,000 pages, and you'll never do it. And the best way to focus is to get into a smaller anthology like Manga File. All my stories were between 4 to 10 pages. So it makes you have to focus maybe it's just a gag story, maybe it's just a joke, but it's something that helps you get into it. Like I've done stuff for Cthulhu books. Cthulhu is hard to spell, and I did 3 of the volumes in a row. So mine is like the narrative continues with each story, but they stand alone.
Yes.
Basically, I like to depower super powered characters that are, I'm so strong, I'm the ultimate evil. I'm like, yeah, but what if you're really a loser and the devil laughs at you? And so, like, the joke is that he just can't win, and the devil keeps beating him in each story, and he's just hopeless and sad and depressed.
Yeah. The short story is, and to some extent, a lost art in the comic book industry. It was one of the things that I was focused on when I first started doing this. I wanted to do those 8 to 10 to 12 page stories with themes that continued, into the next stories. So the notion of having a standalone tale that's actually part of a larger whole that you may not even realize is part of a larger whole until you get further along into it, I think is a good one. It's a good way to present a storyline. It's a good way to get people interested. As you said, when you first introduced your characters, little short stories about them, right? And then you go into the longer tales once the people who are reading it know who these characters are. It's a very good approach to long-term storytelling. Yeah. So um, we've actually, covered what I wanted to cover pretty quickly, more quickly than I would have expected. So what I'm going to do is turn this over to you. Is there anything you would like to talk about that we have not talked about here?
Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned that I worked on My Little Pony. Licensed books are an interesting part of the comic book industry. So, like, there's creator owned, which is like you do your thing with some editorial guidance from a publisher. And then licensed books are okay, so we have the company that hires you, but then you have the company that owns the IP. So everything has to go not just through your editor, but also through the company that owns the property. So for My Little Pony, when I did the comic book covers, what would happen is the editor would come say, hey, I need a cover. Do you think you can do a cover? He's like, yeah, I can. It's like, can you give me like 3 to 5 ideas? And then I'll pitch it to Hasbro or whoever. And so you draw like a couple sketches. And I learned early on when they say sketches, they actually mean lines, not sketches. So they want line art rather than a sketch. So that's a pro tip. Take it from me so you don't cry when you find out they moved on to someone else. But you'll give like 5 different ideas and they go, okay, I love this one. So then when you get that one greenlit, then you actually go and you draw it and you ink it up and then you pass it back to the editor who passes it back to Hasbro. Is it cool? Yes. Okay, cool. So you go through and you do color and then you pass it back and they're like, are we good? Okay, well, they decided that the nose is too pointy. Can you change the nose? You're like, okay, fine, I'll change the nose, whatever. Then you ship it back and then it's done. And then about 6 months later, it shows up as a variant cover in the comic book store, which is a great feeling. A lot of people don't understand. They think, oh well, you're the artist. You can draw whatever you want. And I'm like, no, no, no. There's like all sorts of lists of things. Do this. Don't do this. They've decided that this is not okay anymore. So don't do this. And we have to hide this or do this differently. And that's perfectly, reasonable because they own the IP and they want to represent it the best way.
Yeah, I certainly run into that. Being, the publisher, the editor in chief of my own book, I have to stomp on artists a little bit occasionally when they get something wrong. Glasses do not stick to the face. For example, if you're looking
Right.
at the side view of someone with glasses, you know, you need a side view of somebody wearing the glasses. Not a circle on the side of the eyes. Right? There are little things that artists either are careless about, and that's true of writers too. Writers get careless. And you really got to be on top of it in order to make sure that you're getting the best product you can get. And the more people are willing to listen to input, listen to criticism, the happier the end result is going to be, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, it kind of branches off to another point. What I do colorist work as well. I've
Hmm.
done flatting, color assisting, and a colorist. So the difference between all of those is flatting is somebody who just takes selections underneath the line art and they make them block colors so that later on someone can go fill it with a different color, paint over it, do whatever. A color assistant is someone who takes those sample colors that they might even do that part themselves, the color finding, but they'll match it up to like someone will give you, oh, hey, here's Superman. It's the night scene. So pages 8 to 27, he has these colors. And they'll say, oh, the background, make it 3 shades of gray. And you'll do all that and then pass it off to the whoever is doing it. And then colorist is like, okay, well, can you just do all of that part? We don't need you to draw anything, just color the whole thing. You're like, okay. So I did that for Womanthology. That was an anthology led by women, for women, by women, about women. That was with IDW. At the time, it was a super huge Kickstarter. Now it's just blown away in numbers, but it was a big Kickstarter that I worked on, and I colored other people's work, which was my first attempt at, or first job coloring somebody else's stuff. Later, I had friends that worked on Cleopatra in Space, hired me to do the flats. So many aliens and spaceships. It was a lot. And then because I knew them, I got hired on was it Joe Flood's Birds of Prey. I so many birds, so many birds. And then I got hired for Cat Ninja and the Bright Family. And that was a different kind of system because they had a whole like work structure dynamic that was very interesting. There's like a lot of issues that people don't realize. When you pass your stuff off to a colorist, the line art has to be finished. And finishing line art means making sure the threshold is solid. So like you shouldn't have transparent line art. You shouldn't have like, oh, I stretched this character 10 feet tall and now it's all janky and jagged. It's like, no, don't do that. It's like, or shrinking it and then it's all blurry. It's like increase the threshold so that the grades fall out, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I've done some coloring myself. I know exactly what you're talking about. You don't want, you call them jagged edges. You don't want, yeah,
Anti-alias.
anti-aliasing. You don't want that. You want solid lines to work with. Um, it's just better, easier to color. So, well, Mary, I think unless there's again something else we've forgotten, I think we're about done.
You want to say where you can find me?
Yes, absolutely. You give the social media again. Tell people where they can track what you're doing, where they can get in touch with you. One more time.
Okay, so my website is marybellamy.com. That has all my artwork and uh, things that I've worked on. Zorilita.com is my web store where you can buy some books and stickers and things. You can
Spell
also
that.
ZORILITA.com.
Okay.
And then you can find all Fofax and Ahec on Amazon that print on demand, so I won't be able to sign those for you, but you can still buy them there, and I'd be super appreciative. You can find me everywhere under Zori Lita at like Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, pretty much most places. And then you can always email me at zorilita@gmail.com.
Great. Mary, thank you so much. I hope you have a pleasant weekend. When you have a new project that you want to talk about, get in touch with me. We'll
Oh,
do this
yeah.
again.
One thing. You
Yeah,
can find me at San Diego Comic-Con, small press, table N4, right across from 1700. I'll have a giant white sign.
excellent. All right. See you there.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.